you first met.
So his story was he was trying to build small applications on top of your subscription to make your subscription slightly more relevant. One of the simplest example was being able to send and receive SMS on web. Right, this is 6, 7, 8 years ago now.
Which is still hard to do now. Actually.
Which is still hard to do now.
You know,
which is
we
ridiculous.
sometimes think it'd be quite handy to do that from a laptop, and you can't do it.
It doesn't
easily.
change the world, but it's why the hell isn't that a basic product? And the story that they went through is getting access to a core network, incredibly hard. When you do get access to a core network, a software engineer has to learn SIGTRAN and diameter and protocols from the 70s, 80s, 90s, which they really don't want to do.
We're already having panic attacks just thinking about
it. Indeed.
Hello and welcome to another Telecoms.com podcast. You've had to wait about a week and a half for this one because for various reasons, I think Pierre had something on Friday and we're about to hear that Ian had something yesterday. We've put it off till a Tuesday of all days. And we're especially grateful. We're lucky enough to once more have a special guest who is Erland Presgaard, who's CEO of Working Group 2. Is that right? Yeah, and we'll work out what Working Group 2 is working on soon. And indeed, what the fuck happened to Working Group 1. And whether there'll ever be a Working Group 3. I know you're all wondering already. But we're grateful to Erland, who I'll introduce properly in a sec, for moving his schedule around our hectic social lives. So that's why this is on a Tuesday, and you might first see it on a Wednesday, assuming Pierre gets his shit together.
Oh, well.
Cool. So before we get to Erland, let's just get the bits and bobs out the way. I just alluded to one. We got a bribe of the week this week that only Ian was a recipient of, that I'm not at all butthurt about.
It was pretty much catered for him as well.
Was it? Okay, tell us about your bribe of the week, Ian.
I'm going to get into trouble now for this one, but...
Why?
It was,
you're not supposed to talk about it.
No, I can talk about it, but it was supposed to be going up to Wimbledon with Vodafone, with some kind of tech demos going on. I was thinking I can get a story out of this.
Oh, we see. You get in trouble for just a slack-off day.
It turned out to be just basically sitting on court number 1 and watching Carlos Alcaraz play.
He nearly lost, didn't he?
He did. It was 5 sets. So I'm a massive tennis fan, so that's the sort of thing when I get asked.
And his son's a pro-level tennis player as well.
Well, he's not quite pro, but he's
pro-level for his age.
Working on it.
It's a better story if you say pro.
Yeah, so...
not his son fancies smacking the ball around in a park on a Sunday. There you go.
So that's interesting. My son's this week is at the academy that Carlos Alcaraz trains at. So
cool. Well, that's pretty pro.
So it's kind of fun. It was fun to watch Alcaraz, who's, for people who don't follow tennis, he's a 19-year-old who's already number 7 in the world and regarded as kind of the next big thing. But a bit of an unknown quantity on grass.
What do you think about Ruud then? Just talking.
I like Casper Ruud a lot. Yeah, I was actually a bit surprised Casper Ruud got through yesterday because a lot of people were saying, "Oh, he's obviously not a grass court player." He didn't do very well at Queen's, I think. And,
he lost to English.
He did, but he beat the guy he beat yesterday. Was a Spaniard who's again probably not a grass court player, but a good player nevertheless. So.
He's got Haaland for you and Ruud for you, or not just need some sports hero for you as well?
Well, we got, the English at Wimbledon this year are really interesting because a bunch of this happens every now and then, a bunch of our sort of fringe players are just on a decent run. They all did well in places like Queen's and Eastbourne. We got a bunch of young women who are all doing all right, apart from, of course, Raducanu.
No, she won yesterday.
Yeah, no, I mean doing all right apart from her who we know about is what I mean. But other people like, what was it, Dart and...
Yeah.
Who's that other blonde one?
Katie Boulter.
Boulter, yeah, she's pretty good. Burridge lost yesterday, but she did all right at Eastbourne.
Yeah, and she got good brownie points for looking after the ball boy.
That's right, she gave him a bag of sweets.
Murray won yesterday.
And Murray won. And then we got people like Peniston and
won
Draper.
Yesterday. Peniston won this morning.
Right.
And... Draper's quite interesting to watch. He's sort of, again, he's young and talented and up and coming. Maybe quite not an Alcaraz yet, but who knows?
Yeah. So that's all looking promising.
And there's a guy at the moment playing as we do this podcast called Paul Jubb, who's playing Kyrgios.
I've never heard of him.
Well, he won the first set against Kyrgios.
Right. Okay.
Which is
anyway, so was it a good day? Was it like a box or anything?
So it's weird. You go in.
Next to Kate and William.
It wasn't next to Kate and William. It wasn't a box.
Richard.
It's basically they don't seem to have that set up at Wimbledon. So you go in. They have the lounges around the stadium where you can go and drink as much as you want and eat. And surprisingly enough, Paolo Pescatore was there.
Right.
You'd never have thought that that would be the sort of person who'd be.
I'd be even more surprised if Justin Springham was there.
Justin wasn't there.
Right, that's not like
It
him.
was the people I knew were Paolo and Kester Mann. I don't know if you know these guys, Erland, but they're a couple of analysts in the telecom sector. So one works for CCS Insight, and the other one used to work for CCS Insight, but now sort of independent.
One man band.
Okay.
And there was basically a lunch and a few drinks. I thought they were going to do something like show how Vodafone's involved with tracking,
but it was
was
just a
working with
jolly.
IBM on analytics that you can use for. That would have been like a kind of good little story to do, but there wasn't any of
So
that.
is that what you told Phil? You were like, I'm going to get
Yeah,
some,
I did tell Phil that.
some IoT, some IoT
I did,
stories.
yeah. They had this announcement
Phil.
in the morning about how they're using IoT technology at Wimbledon to track strawberries and the temperature of strawberries and make sure that they don't go
That's
off
a
when
reach,
they
isn't
arrive.
it?
And I thought, there's no way I'm writing that up. It's just too dull. So
Yeah, and also like they wouldn't serve shitty strawberries anyway. Yeah, well, your conscience is clear.
Yeah, we had the lunch, then I went and watched the match, and it was 5 sets. So by the time that finished, I think Kester and I went onto the hill for a bit.
Okay,
and
Henman
watched
Hill.
a bit of Henman, and then my son phoned and went, the electricity's not working at home, so I left.
So
and
that
came
was
home.
that. So there's no afters. So you're not hungover today. It is,
I
you had a
didn't
couple.
feel great. I had quite a lot of Pims during the
Pims.
day.
It's got to be done, isn't it?
Yeah.
Pims.
Job is now
Which isn't a drink I'd
down
ever-
Very
2
British.
sets to 1.
Yeah, it is.
Oh dear me.
3-3 in the
said
fourth
that.
set.
Okay, well that was good. Were there many other hacks apart from you?
There was 2 guys from the Sunday Times,
Right.
and I didn't know who they were.
I'm just looking to assuage my butt not being invited. That's fine. If national press got invited over me, I'm sort of all right. But 2 from Sunday Times, that's a bit of a piss take, isn't it? They could have had one for Sunday
I
Times.
think they
and
were
me.
both from the Sunday Times.
Anyway.
Yeah.
All right, well, there we go. Vodafone, just don't expect any coverage of me ever again. No,
Needed someone to write about the strawberries, though, right? So
Exactly. That'll be a big feature to pad out
Yeah.
their big
We
Sunday
did put it in
supplement.
Eurobytes, the strawberry stuff.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
that's something, then, isn't it? Well, it justifies them spending however much they did.
And I
getting
worked
into
on
Wimbledon.
Sunday to sort of even
Mate,
things out.
you don't have to explain yourself
I'm
to me.
justifying my, yeah.
And Phil, if you're watching, don't sack him. He can get a fucking Wimbledon if it's on the house. For God's sake, I would have gone without any hesitation. Okay,
I could have walked there.
I
You
did
could've
walk
walked-
there. Yeah,
right, lovely.
I did walk there. Yeah.
No
What
expensive
else?
cab.
The only afters I got to talk about. I got another brief movie review. So you remember I went and saw Top Gun Maverick, and I was like,
When was that?
a pod or 2 ago,
Oh, really? Okay.
possibly even
You've
the
seen
last
it
one.
as well now.
I really liked
Have you
it.
seen
Yeah, you
Top
really
Gun-
liked it.
Have you seen
Yeah,
Top
that's
Gun
fine.
Maverick, Erland?
Yeah.
not yet, but I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah,
I was
so
giddy at being at a cinema at all.
yeah, I mean, look, I'm not
crossing, yeah.
I'm not going to criticise. I'm not going to be like pretentious and go it lacked depth. The whole point of it is to lack depth. It's supposed to be superficial. It's supposed to be a romp. It's supposed to be lots of footage of fighters going whoosh.
Yeah.
I just found it a bit boring. It's just a classic action film where they just have almost negligible plot and dialogue, just linking one set piece to another. But that's fine. If that's all you've signed up for, then that's
Yeah.
good. I just found it a bit boring. But what I saw last night with the whole family was Elvis. I don't know what the full name of it is. Elvis the movie
think
or
it's just
something.
Elvis.
Which has got Tom Hanks in it, don't
Yeah,
not
as-
playing Elvis.
as-
Apparently,
Colonel
there's too
Tom
much of
Parker.
him.
Well, I just thought it was fucking amazing. It was I liked it in all the ways that I found Maverick boring. It was emotional. It was thoughtful. It was profound. I thought it did a great. It sort of. I've never really given a toss about Elvis other than to acknowledge him as this amazing cultural figure, but it sort of reinvigorated an interest in Elvis for me.
Did it make you want to put on your Elvis costume
Yeah.
and
and
go
do
to
all
Las
that?
Vegas?
I tell you what, the lead actor was amazing.
yeah.
Yeah.
He just owned it.
Austin Butler.
Yeah, I've never heard of the guy, but he just owned it.
I heard that some people were like a bit taken out of the movie when it's clearly Tom Hanks in a fat suit
Yeah.
with
What
a
is
funny
that?
accent.
Is that cultural appropriation or something?
No, it's just like it's weird.
Because you hear that you can't have a certain identity group
Yeah.
play and a certain other identity group. So maybe only a legitimately fat person. He's actually got to go and eat at McDonald's every day for a year
It's
before
because
he can
most
fucking
people
do
in
it.
the movie are unknown.
Has it got that
Yeah.
bad? Really? I mean, I know.
I'm slightly parodying
I
it.
know they make a fuss about someone who's not gay playing a gay person.
It's a social media
but-
thing. You'll get a few squeaky wheels go. Yeah, that person. I think like Eddie Redmayne played someone who's gay or trans, and he's not.
That's
and-
ridiculous, though. If it's got to the stage where you can't play someone who's fat, it's going to get to the point you can't play someone who's a different personality to you.
Well, you can do
Which
what
is
you
what
want.
actors do, isn't
You
it?
can do
I
what
mean-
you want. It's just a matter of whether you respond to the people who moan about it.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's not go down that fucking rabbit hole. I'll get myself sacked.
It's been a half hour already.
and with the current cost of living crisis, I can't afford to get sacked right now, and we'll come on to that. All right, so I think that's enough faffing. In terms of what we're going to talk about, I mean, especially when we have a guest, it tends to be a bit more fluid. But we're going to talk about everything to do with what Erlend does, which is going to focus principally on public cloud and how that affects telcos, if I've understood it correctly. I have to announce now that Erlend's on because Ian's spoken to him, and we've never met before. So if he's rubbish, I can only apologise, and it's Ian's fault. Only joking.
I just
Erlend.
apologise in
You're
advance.
clearly not rubbish from the brief time I've been chatting to you. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. We might talk a little bit about something I was just alluding to, not so much cost of living crisis, but sort of global macroeconomics and how that's affecting telecoms. And then we might finish, if we've got time, although I've been waffling for so long, we probably won't.
Not as long as you have done in the past, though. That's quite short.
No, well, yeah,
preamble.
but Pierre's already hassling me about time because he's got some shit to do.
I can see the time code. It's pretty much on par with other days.
We might conclude with a bit of metaverse chat just because they're trying to standardise it, which seems futile to me. Keith, all right, so that's enough of that. Erlend, hello.
Hello.
Thanks for putting up with all that preamble bullshit. If you've seen one or two pods before, you'll know that's sort of par for the course. So we haven't met before. I know from introducing you, I know you're a very relevant guest, and I'm very happy to have you here. But why don't I not butcher your sort of life story and have you introduce yourself? Why are we talking to you on the Telecoms.com podcast?
I think you're talking to us because we're a bit of an outlier, a bit of a...
We being...
Working group 2
already. Working group 2. That's it. Yeah.
Not working group 1, not 3, but 2. Very important. There's a story behind working group 2, by the way, which we should get into. But,
we definitely should.
But I think we're a bit of an outlier. We try to, shall we say, public cloud for us is a tool, not a goal.
Right.
And we try to use public cloud to change business models and fundamentally change a fairly significant part of how operators do stuff.
So why don't you, before we get further into what Working Group 2 does, why don't you just give us a quick background as to how you ended up doing what you're doing now? What's your professional background?
So I'm one of the few non-engineers in the company, to my regret, but such is life.
What's your thing, if not engineering? Are you a commercial guy?
Yeah, commercial guy, so I'm a business guy. Or and then background to this is I was I have a kind of a business background, consulting background. I ended up in telecom, which I enjoy for its complexity and weirdness and importance, I would say. And as part of this, I was in Bangladesh working for Telenor.
Telenor, right? Yeah.
In Grameenphone, which is
and you are yourself Norwegian, yeah?
I'm Norwegian, yeah.
Grameenphone's a sort of subsidiary. The Bangladesh subsidiary of Telenor, yeah?
Correct. Kind of the biggest operator in Bangladesh. I think it's got like 70 million subs now.
Yeah, it's a surprisingly big country, Bangladesh. When you look at it, it's just this little bit in between India and East Asia, and it's got about, what, 160?
Well, we were just talking about that before you came on, because there's an interesting stat about Dhaka, isn't there?
Yeah.
Where
So when they were calculating the population of Dhaka, the error of margin in the calculation of the population of Dhaka is the same as the population of Norway. So it's kind of, they were talking 20 to 25
Give
million
or take
people.
a Norway.
Yeah. But it's an amazing country, but with its challenges. But the amazing thing about
geographically as well, they have just massive floods every now and then, don't they?
They are a very low-lying country with lots of rivers coming through it. So they are very prone. And there's a bad one now in the northern parts. Yeah.
Right.
So but it's but an incredibly resilient population. It's an amazing country, but you need to engage with it to appreciate it fully. But we were there, and being Grameenphone there is like being Google in a country, because to be honest, the world at large doesn't care a hell of a lot about Bangladesh. And you're there, you're huge. You have 500,000 physical points of sale,
right,
in this country, right?
Because they're all just little
tea shops selling a SIM card and topping up, right? Yeah. So you have a market presence which is unrivaled for any telco anywhere. And we were there, and we were working quite a lot with the Googles and Facebooks of the world to, spread connectivity and handsets and Android and whatever. And the story that we tell is every time we came to a meeting with these tech giants, they had a product manager, they had an engineer, and they had a sales guy, And in the next meeting, they'd fixed something, they'd done something. And we had maybe created a spec, maybe sent a purchase order or something, but we hadn't done anything.
So they were getting their shit together a lot more quickly than you.
A hell of a lot quicker.
Put it into my language.
And even when we did get our shit together, we did that for one country, but we couldn't then naturally easily export that to the other countries of the Telenor group.
That feels like a sort of microcosmic view of the whole telco versus hyperscaler big tech paradigm.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And long story short, I think this led to me saying this, there's a fundamental gap in how being global and how being able to control your tech to quickly do things. And this is leading to a performance gap that is extremely wide. And in parallel, Werner Eriksson, kind of co-founder and CTO, he was inside Telenor building something called software telco. And we, by coincidence and by accident, I would say, met each other. And we said, you got something here. And we started talking.
So he was doing software for Telenor when you first met?
So his story was he was trying to build small applications on top of your subscription to make your subscription slightly more relevant. One of the simplest example was being able to send and receive SMS on web. Right. This is 6, 7, 8 years ago now.
Which is still hard to do now, actually.
Which is still hard to do now, which is ridiculous.
We sometimes think it'd be quite handy to do that from a laptop, and you can't do it.
It doesn't
easily.
change the world, but it's why the hell isn't that, a basic product? And the story that they went through is, getting access to a core network, incredibly hard. When you do get access to a core network, a software engineer has to learn SIGTRAN and diameter and protocols from the 70s, 80s, 90s, which they really don't want to do.
We're already having panic attacks just thinking about it.
Indeed. And then having done that, you spend so much time and effort that your business case for your small product is already blown to pieces. So then you try to fix it by going to the other operators in the group and saying, do you want the product? And then you realize that their core networks are just different enough that it's like reintegrating or rebuilding the product all over again.
So why are they different? Is it because they've bought them from the same vendors, I guess, but they've sort of tailored it, or is that sort of...
Core networks are just so immensely complex that even despite of these tens of thousands of pages of specs, they're just different enough that only the roaming products, I would say, actually work consistently across.
Right. Because they have to be international.
They have to, right?
Yeah.
But everything else is just different enough that you can't use it as a platform. And this is where telco innovation goes to die.
Yep.
So I was frustrated by watching these guys beating us at every kind of corner. Werner actually built something that resembled something that they were building. And we said, hey, this has promise. Let's rebuild the telco world for the future. And let's use the core network as the angle into building global mobile telco platforms that you can kind of make programmable, API'd, global scale, and kind of take the playbooks from these amazingly efficient and effective tech giants and bring it into telco by leveraging the core network.
So it's gone from, this was an internal Telenor project back then, and how's it gone from that to being what you're now calling? I mean, Scott was joking about working group one. I don't know if there's a story there that there was something that was done that didn't quite work out. But what's the journey to where you've gone to now? I guess
I think the journey was we met, we discussed, we kind of said, okay, we want to build a global platform where operators around the world, be it a private network or a big MNO, can plug in their radio networks and just make being an operator a lot simpler.
Yeah.
And to do that, we realized that's going to be quite hard to do. It's not a trivial exercise to undertake. You're going to need quite a bit of...
Get on with it.
Yeah, get on with it. But telecom groups aren't built to govern that sort of company. So we basically went to Telenor and said, hey, we want to do this. And they said, yeah, good. That sounds interesting.
We'll get back to you.
But they also said, get it. Okay, if you can find investors, we'll let you spin off. But they want to be part of it because they love the idea, but they also acknowledge that they wouldn't be the right...
And they're still a part of it now.
So they're still a big part of it, but they let us spin off. So they took a minority stake. That was very important for them and for us.
Yeah. I think it's really good. Sorry to butt in. I think it's really good when big companies have that sort of incubator, sort of lab thing going on. Because what they're really doing is they're acknowledging that they've got certain core competences. We've chatted about this before. And whenever any company tries to go outside of its core competence, it's not that the employees lack the intellect to adapt. It's just that there's a cultural gearing in a certain... it's just built to point in a certain direction. It's like a super tanker. You can't just suddenly go, we're going to go 90 degrees that way.
And telco is capex heavy. It's like it's making big capex decisions and then monetizing them, and the entire incentive system is built around that. So suddenly moving to an OPEX world and uncertain software development timelines is extremely hard for them. It's not, it's not to their discredit. It's just a different system. Anyway, they allowed us to spin off. We got a fund called Digital Alpha, which is a PE fund closely associated with Cisco and then some of us have a stake in the middle. So it's an independent company outside of Telenor governance, but with they're still absolutely backing the company. And then we've been on that journey for 4.5 years now after we spun off.
And I remember we spoke earlier in the year, there are quite a few fairly prominent companies that you're working with now. I don't know if you can name any on the pod, but
no, sure.
I think you can probably name a few, can't you?
We can. So I think this is, by the way, one of the most important things that telecoms can do to help incubate these companies is be a customer. So I think Telenor as an owner has been important, but Telenor as an anchor customer has been incredibly important.
Right.
Because your single biggest challenge...
So it validates the whole thing,
because your single biggest challenge in this industry, especially in core networks, maybe more than anywhere else, is credibility. Right? Because you're a fairly small part of cost and you're a big part of potential risk.
You give good PowerPoint, but where's the practical...
Yeah. So being a customer is actually hugely important, and they have been. Second customer was then E-Rate, which is, I would say, one of the leading Nordic MVNEs. So we started with the full MVNO part of the stack.
Yep.
And then we're building our way all the way down. So we can now offer full MNO, full core networks. But we didn't do that initially. But
in the case of, sorry to butt in, just in the case of Telenor, it's not that they're using Working Group 2 for their whole core network across, which would be, obviously you'd love that, I guess. I don't know whether you would, maybe you wouldn't love it. I don't know whether, I mean, would you be capable of it, I guess?
Now, yes.
Right.
Not for, we wouldn't go to Verizon in the US, say, and please take your network. That's not going to happen. But we can take, I would say, any operator below, call it 10 million. I think we would
10 million
users. I think we would be reasonably comfortable with. But then it depends on legacy and complexity. How many, how much legacy integrations for old stuff from the 70s do they have that we don't want to touch? Yeah. So there is some there, but in terms of scale and complexity for a full MNO, we would be happy to take it.
So forgive me if you've already explained it and it didn't sink in. What do you do for the core?
Right.
I mean, what do you bring to the table? What pain point do you address?
Yeah. So we. It's a slightly
just
more
say if you need another beer. We've got the beers over.
To explain this, I didn't. So I think when we talk to operators, we tell there are two parts to the story. One is they can get the same that they can get from the incumbents, I would say, but a lot more affordably and a lot more easily. So we deliver core network as a service. Right. And it's fully as a service. So
core network would mean the same sort of stuff that someone would go to an Ericsson, say, or a Nokia, or a Huawei, or one of those companies, an Oracle.
And we meet them in RFPs all the time. Yeah, so it's your full voice stack, your full messaging stack, your full authentication stack.
So this is quite a contrast, Working Group 2. I mean, I don't know how many people are working for Working Group 2 at the moment, but comparing them with these massive Nordic
perhaps there's only two. Providers. That's why it's called that. There's only him and his mate.
It's 68, I think,
68, today. Okay. So it's a big contrast with the sort of size of the... I mean, is that one of the issues, that you've got to then persuade a company with 10 million to go and trust a 68 person.
But this is also where it gets super interesting, because we've actually built all of that functionality with that team, which honestly has been half of that size for the duration of the life of the company. So the question is, how the hell can you build all of that stuff? And this is HLR, HSS, it's 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G. Yep. It is full MNO core now. Right, so we can operate
a hell of a lot for
that's a hell of a lot for a small team. But we made some choices that allows busy people, yes, but also some radical choices. So, for example, we try to, we have to look like any other core network to the outside world. Mm-hmm. So, SIG-trend and diameter. We have to talk SIG-trend and diameter on the outside, but on the inside, we actually choose to say no. We'll actually translate SIG-trend and diameter into gRPC-based protocols. So on the inside, we can take a software developer that's never heard of telco, and you can put him to actually start working on our HLR, as an example.
Yeah.
And we use WebRTC-based stuff for our voice stack, not the IMS infrastructure, which is a complete nightmare to work with. So on the inside,
there's a sort of interface that will work with, that translates what they're doing into the sort of languages that you need, that have been, as you said, they've been around since the 70s and the 80s, and you need to sort of cater to them to some extent.
Yes.
Okay.
But that's a double-edged sword, because that means, at least for several of the pieces of the stack, we can't rip it out. So the traditional logic of an operator wanting to buy one box from this vendor, another box from that vendor, and a third box from this vendor, that won't necessarily work with us. There are exceptions to this rule, but we kind of say, hey, it's a full core, and you get it at an amazing price, and you get all kinds of innovation, which we'll come back to. But you can't pick and choose this box and make it work with any other box. We'll work with any other network, but not any given box.
So one thing that I was thinking of, perhaps got it wrong, just because it's at the forefront of my mind, I was explaining to a colleague of mine who was writing about a bit of news today about Ericsson's acquisition of Vonage being delayed because they can't start hanging out with people the Yanks don't like. And I was just explaining to my colleague what the point of the Vonage acquisition was. Anyway, cut a long story short, because that's not what this is about. But I was explaining the significance of APIs to Ericsson and the significance of being able to create this, for want of a better term, bit of middleware that allows developers who don't know dick about telecoms to still develop software that will be able to communicate with the network. And anyway, that just made me think of some of the stuff you were talking about, which is enabling disparate bits of technology that previously couldn't communicate with each other to do so. Is it? But
this is the whole point of our project, is to enable people to do stuff with the core that they couldn't do before. Now, there's a very interesting contrast between what Vonage is or Ericsson doing in Vonage and what Nokia is saying that they're doing, and we believe a lot more in one model than the other. I would actually say we're building the mobile core network so that you can get a good API.
Right.
We actually started because we were building stuff up here, finding it was so difficult to build stuff on top of the network that we had to rebuild the network able to create a good API.
So it's like a chicken and egg.
I think the industry is actually getting a lot of this wrong, because they're insisting on trying to, or not the industry, some parts of the industry are trying to say, here I have a good API, now let me cobble together a network that works with the API.
Yeah.
Reality is, we're in the middle of or actually done now, with a swap program for one of our customers. We can talk. There were more customers that we didn't talk about earlier, but one of the customers is Hutchinson, and this is a public example. And it's not unique to them. For a core network, let's say that you have 20 vendors, 20 different vendors in your core network.
Is that typical that someone would have that many?
It'll depend a lot, but in bits and pieces, yes. I don't think that's atypical. And let's say that an API that you're making touches 3 or 4 different vendors. Now, let's say that you're trying to upgrade that API, introduce a new functionality of that API, and it touches 3 or 4 different vendors. Just think about the pragmatic implementations of that, or the implications. Yeah. That's a change project. That's a 6-month, a 12-month thing with a PO and a change request and back and forth. That's not how Twilio does it. And that's what you're competing against.
I noticed that actually. What tiny bit of background reading I did before talking to you was Ian sending me the story that he wrote from speaking to you back in February, and there was a lot of reference to Twilio, about whom I know close to fuck all.
Well, they're an APIs company. They're quite similar to the
Vonage.
The Vonage, basically.
Right.
So that's
they made telco accessible for at least some use cases, because telcos weren't able to do it well themselves. They made it easy. The first product they had, I think, was making it easy to send SMS for developers.
Right.
So instead of working with lots and lots of different operators, you have one thing that allows you to then roll it out to,
which makes sense. I completely get the concept of these APIs. It's probably a misnomer, but I call them middleware just because in my language, I just picture middleware as something that enables one bit of technology to work well with another bit of technology, and it's like the bit in the middle that's stitching them together.
Which is fair.
By the way, so can you chuck those over? I'm going to stick them in the ice beyond your bag. Sorry, what were you about to say? Yeah.
No, I think but I think the industry the telco industry should learn from the surrounding industries, which is fitting an API to a very, very complex tech stack is extremely hard to do.
Yeah.
It's just, and it hasn't been successful for decades.
Is that what I mean? just on the sort of pitch, you know, when you're in meetings with people and going out and speaking to operators, and they're talking about their core networks and looking at prospective vendors, and they probably have been used to working with an Ericsson or a Nokia in the past. I mean, what's your main sort of selling point? Presumably you're not just saying, well, you can get the same stuff through us instead, and we're only 68 people and they've got loads, because that might even worry them potentially, that there's so few people to maintain this. So what's the kind of main?
So I think again, there's two pieces to the pitch. So one is, hey, you pay half. It's way simpler than you have now.
Yep. So it's a big cost savings.
Big cost, very significant cost savings. Yep. So kind of, it depends on your scale and your use case, but call it 30 to 70% savings. So 50 as a midpoint.
Yep.
So you can pay half, and you get core network as a service delivered as an API, basically. That's half the pitch. The other pitch is exactly as we talked about APIs. We're building we used to call it Android for networks.
Yeah.
Right. So you're building APIs, and then you're building developer portals and marketplaces where literally anyone in the world can log on, create their company, build a product, publish it to the platform, and any operator can take that product and give it to their users.
It's a good way of putting it.
Yeah.
And platform, I mean, the use of platform, I understand that. I don't know to what extent other people do. Whenever I'm writing about platforms, I understand that as a sort of agnostic. I mean, just to think about the actual semantics of the word platform, it's just a deck upon which you can build stuff.
Yeah.
And so I think platform's a really good word to describe these sorts of things.
So we're building a global mobile core-based platform,
right,
to make connectivity easy to use for what you need to use it for.
And if somebody came along, so let's say, you know, a really big operator did come along and want you to come in and phase out some of these old systems that they've got, and maybe this is I mean, I'm suspecting that one of the challenges is a cultural one, that they're just not used to working with startups on that basis. But what sort of process do they have to go through? I mean, you're talking yourself about how much complexity there is there in the existing core. I mean, is this one of the barriers to kind of doing those deals? Because just taking all of that out and putting it in instead is just very hard work, or
extremely.
Yeah.
So I think and this is where on this podcast and other podcasts, you heard the industry saying, there's not enough innovation, there's not enough new players.
Yeah.
But then, to be honest, they're their own worst enemy in this regard. There's just systemic resistance.
Yeah.
I think there's lots of individuals that want to accept everything new. Our approach to this is, so as I said, what we don't do is we don't go to Verizon or AT&T or any of the 100 million sub operators and say, we'll switch your core. We don't spend a single calorie doing that.
Yeah.
We can go to any sub 10 million operator and say, we'll switch your core, but that's also going to take time, to be clear. So any greenfield operator, any MVNX, any private network, and then to the really big
MVNX.
ones.
I haven't heard that. Why did you say X?
MVNO, MVNE, MVNA.
What's ENA?
I don't know what ENA is.
So MVNO is MVNO. E is enabler.
Yeah.
EA is enabler, but they also buy the wholesale. They buy capacity and resell capacity on behalf of.
So an MVNO needs an MVNE. Yeah.
Right. Shit.
Yeah.
I've never thought about
EE is an MVNE.
I've only been doing this for 8 years.
EE is an MVNE. Any network operator is an MVNE.
Oh, I
if it's
see.
got MVNO
Right.
customers.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's like calling something a probiotic where it's actually just a banana.
Sure. Yeah, kind of.
I like it.
But and then adjacent use cases. So for Verizon, we would say, hey, Verizon, you have your core, but there's these 100 things that you're not able to do.
Yeah.
Private networks, or an enterprise product, or these 10 products that you're not able to build in your core. Let's spin up an adjacent core.
This whole enterprise thing, with people like in markets like Germany in particular, where they've even gone off and licensed sort of spectrum directly to, some of the corporations and companies. And I think Ofcom's doing a similar thing here.
Becoming more common.
This is quite a big opportunity for companies like Working Group 2 to come in and say, you're not doing a national network that's serving 50 million people. You're doing something that's factory based, and we can come in and do it agilely and
absolutely.
Yeah.
And I was giving the example, Amazon or any of the cloud providers for that matter, they serve a startup with one guy with a credit card. They serve with storage, compute, databases, whatnot, and he logs on and puts in his credit card, and he's a customer. And they actually serve the biggest enterprises in the world with fundamentally the same product.
It's just scale.
Just scale.
Yeah.
And why? And I think this is a good question. Why is telco so different? Is complexity in telco so radically different that that's going to look completely different in 10 years? And we think not, or we're absolutely sure it's not.
So you seem to be saying that it's more cultural than technological. They could do it. There's just the cultural inertia.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there a risk that the likes of Ericsson and Nokia go, well, we can respond to this. We can put more of our staff on the stuff that actually needs you to make boxes and tools, and our software team can be 30 people, and we can, we can sort of match working group 2 and then cut our prices.
That's the startup dilemma generally, I would have thought.
It's so first of all, I have a lot of respect for Ericsson and Nokia, and I think they're serious companies that do serious work, and there's no doubt that they have the competencies. I think it's a Clayton Christensen, Clayton Christensen, the professor, the Innovator's Dilemma book.
Yeah.
I think it's that sort of question.
Yeah.
And you get into exit strategies as well.
Yeah.
That's why it's being nice about them.
No, but it's not about. Obviously, they know how. Yeah. There's no discussion about that. Yeah. Obviously, they can. Will they? I honestly don't know.
Well, that's the flip side of the thing I was talking about earlier with the incubation. Because I went and visited Ericsson up in, I think, Kista.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
is it pronounced Kista though? Or
Kista,
spelled with a K, so I'd say Kista, but people say Kista.
Is it Kista?
Yeah.
Okay, Kista. And they took me to this little bit where there's all innovation, and inevitably foosball tables. In fact, I even had a photo of me playing foosball with this glamorous young lady. And I thought, yeah, cool. But I also thought, they're going, look how into innovation we are. I thought they're trying a bit hard at the time. But the flip side of that is, of course, as I was just joking about with the exit strategy, the other thing you can do is not have any real internal innovation at all and just have some sort of connected people looking around for people to buy. And typically when you buy a sort of sub 100 headcount kind of company, you're normally buying the top of it. You're buying the sort of intellectual property. Yes, they might have some actual intellectual property, but you're buying the expertise that you've seen proven in the form of your business partners, and all that sort of thing.
But I sort of wonder if there's I'm not expecting you to sort of slag off Ericsson, but the parallel with something like, like Open RAN, for instance, where the Open RAN players would say, well, we're able to do this, and the reason that the companies like Ericsson and Nokia aren't going to go enthusiastically down that road is because it's basically cannibalizing what they're doing and opening up the opportunity for other companies to come in, and then they end up with a smaller piece of the pie. Whereas when you start talking about cost savings of 30 to 70%, obviously it's not in incumbents' interests to go and cut their prices by 30 to 70%. They're more likely to try and be obstructive and make it difficult for companies like you to get in, I'm guessing, in a way, but or take you over even.
Yeah. I think it's an extremely complex picture.
Yeah,
I think more than anything else, because it depends on the situation. It's very situational and very contextual. I do think, I think.
We asked you a really shitty question there.
No, I'm intrigued at what we're going to see coming out of them, because you're right, it's cannibalization, but core is also a small part of their income.
Yeah.
So if they're selling in RAN, they can give away core.
Yeah.
And it's been known to happen. I would say.
That many times.
But the flip side for me will be the telco side itself, which talks a lot about we want to do more ourselves, we want to be less reliant on big vendors, we want to have some of our own competencies, we want to have some of our intellectual property and take responsibility for doing things. As Scott was saying, that Telenor kind of had the foresight to give you the backing and to do it. You sort of think to yourself, as someone who hasn't worked for an operator, maybe it's the sort of thing that operators should be doing, more of, and then taking advantage of those companies. But
and I think there's I think the biggest realization for me is there is a system in place, like thousands and thousands and thousands of people with jobs and with incentives.
Yeah, exactly.
And when someone like us comes in, that literally they cross, right? There is a whole industry that has built relationships, built their understanding, their technology understanding, their lives on stuff which we change radically.
Like anyone who has got a variable element to their salary, this is something that interests me a lot outside of the context of this conversation. Let's say I've got a 10% variable to my salary. I will obsess about that 10% variable. I'll write off the 90% of it that I get, whether or not I even fucking get out of bed on a Monday morning. And I'll obsess about the variable. And people do, because it's just human nature, it's just psychology. And that happens with incentive structures, as you were just pointing out, more broadly within companies, which is, if, as you say, I remember writing about this. I used to write more about smartphones and smartphone platforms, and this is around the time. This was before the duopoly of Android and iOS became entrenched, and we still had BlackBerry, and we had things like Palm OS and Symbian, and all that sort of thing. And you just pictured all these people whose internal incentives were based on that platform. They're not just suddenly go, yeah, fuck it, let's go with Android. And then the biggest one for me was Microsoft. So we had Windows. First, we had Windows Mobile, which is this catastrophe. I don't know how old you are.
No.
But did you ever have one of those phones with the drop-down menus and you had to use a stylus?
I saw them. I didn't have them.
Oh, right. I actually had one. HTC Titan 2, I think it was called. It was far from a goddamn Titan, I'll tell you that much. But, it was basically a Windows desktop OS on a handheld device. And then they eventually moved on to Windows Phone, which was this sort of not... it had some merits, this sort of tile-based thing.
Yeah, that wasn't all bad. It was
wasn't
late.
at all bad. It was late, but it was also Microsoft couldn't get past the point of this anecdote. Microsoft couldn't get past the fact that their core business model is selling software.
Yeah.
Whereas Google was already there with Android, effectively giving it away for free, obviously on the condition that you basically sell your soul to Android, which is something Google and Nokia used to talk about very amusingly. But you can't compete with that. When there's a really good free product on the market, how can you convince people to pay for an alternative? And anyway, so the only reason I bring that up is another example of corporate culture. Now, Microsoft, over the decades, or about the decade or two since I was writing about that, has rebranded itself very successfully and become a sort of major cloud player, which I'm going to steer onto in a sec, cloud more generally. But at the time, it just wasn't ready. It was Steve Ballmer, who was this fucking used car salesman.
Nutella has done a good job, I think we can safely say, at least. Let's agree on that.
Yeah. You call him Nutella? Is that a joke, or did you just mispronounce it? Because I think that's quite funny.
I just mispronounced it.
It's Nadiella, I think. It's Satya Nadiella, I think.
I was going to say
I'm going to look it up.
Nutella, but now I...
Well, I think
Nutella's
that chocolate
That's
spread.
Nutella.
I'm going to look it up. I might be talking shit. I'm going to look it up. But anyway, I interrupted. But to agree with you, which is this sort of corporate culture.
It is, and I think that the industry just needs to. If you want players like us, if you want to, and we have a number of these discussions, and we're getting kind of close to
Nadella.
Nadella.
That's right. We were close.
But I think what they have to do is they just have to say, okay, I understand. I'm not going to swap out my 100 million user core tomorrow, but I can get experience with this player for a set of use cases, and let's get started. Let's get comfortable.
Do you find that when you're doing stuff now with some of the people that you've mentioned on, say, an IoT project or a private deployment or something that's like a sideline to their main business, that they're looking at that, and then they've obviously got the main bit that they are doing, let's say with Nokia and an Ericsson, and it suddenly gives them an opportunity to look at the two. You've got the same CTO there, presumably, sort of looking at this, going, hang on a minute, how does this measure? And then maybe you are getting closer to doing some of the stuff that you're saying. We're not spending a calorie on talking to, Verizon about 100 million deployment. But no,
absolutely. And I think that's one of the CTOs that we work with. She's pretty clear that working with us, apart from solving certain use cases, gives her ammunition, partly towards her internal team, actually.
Right.
Maybe more than anything else, which says, "Hey, can't do this, can't do that," and then she turns around to us and says, "Can we do that? Yeah, we can do that. Okay, but they can.
So these guys can do it. Why can't you?
Exactly.
Yeah, totally.
So and that can be quite valuable,
Yeah.
And then the second thing is towards vendors, and can you do this and at that cost? And it's like, no, can't do that. Okay, can you? Well, these guys can, so why can't you? So it gives her a bit of, and she can get technical details on exactly how it's done.
Yeah.
From us. and then turn around and challenge her other vendors, and that gives her credibility in some of these discussions.
Does the sort of, because people are talking a lot more at the moment about standalone 5G, and it sounds like there's a bit of an opportunity for new vendors to come in as companies start to make that upgrade from non-standalone to standalone. Is that somewhere that you can make inroads a little bit because they're looking a bit more at the core network side of things and thinking about who they use?
I think it's yes and no, in the sense that, again, if it's a 100 million core network, they're still not going to let you in on 5G SA in a way.
Yeah.
But 5G SA triggers, is part of the triggers of private networks, for sure, yes. And then I think for the somewhat smaller operators, it's a trigger point for saying, oh, damn, I don't have a 5G strategy. I still need to solve 2G, 3G, and 4G, and NSA, and 5G. Mm-hmm. The complexity is just overwhelming. What the hell am I going to do? And and my cost equation doesn't make sense anymore. I'm open to a radical solution now. So 5G, but in the same way that IMS or any G, I would say, it's a trigger point for saying this model that I'm using isn't working anymore. Yeah. My cost and complexity, if my complexity key is going up, my cost is at best slightly decreasing, and my revenue is flat and eaten up by inflation. And it doesn't add up anymore. And then you're getting close to a point where they say, I need to change my model, not just get another 2% procurement savings. And 5G is a trigger point for that to happen. So it's not 5G as such, I would say. It's more like it's a trigger point for a new generation that triggers even more complexity.
Yeah.
I'm going to butt in because I want to steer it onto public cloud. Just because I thought it was an interesting. We haven't gone on about it for a while.
Well, we haven't. Public cloud's not come into it much because you're heavily involved with.
Well, one way in which it came into it, which maybe it didn't, but when you said core as a service, anytime I hear as a service now, I increasingly think public cloud, just because obviously one of the points of as a service, perhaps more in the sort of technological implementation rather than the commercial side. And the commercial side obviously is like a subscription that you can pick up and drop, as opposed to having to buy a box bit of software that you're committed to for decades. Is that it's totally sort of transportable in principle. And in other words, you can host it anywhere. And increasingly, the hosting happens on the public cloud. So I don't know. Do you think that was a viable segue into public cloud? Does that make sense?
Pretty good. I like it.
Cool. So if you're offering something as a service, are you basically steering your potential or actual customers onto the public cloud?
So yes, is the short answer. The slightly longer version is we're cynical. Cloud is a tool. It's not a goal, right? Public cloud is a tool, but we started using OpenStack. I was saying this earlier, that we started on OpenStack, but we spent half the team's effort managing OpenStack instead of building applications. And so we were working with Amazon 6-7 years ago. So we've been live with a core network on public cloud commercially live for 5 years now.
Right.
Probably one of the most mature core networks in public cloud.
I certainly wasn't banging on about public cloud 5 years ago.
I guess this is one of the reasons you've been able to do it with a team of 6 years. Because if you stuck with that OpenStack route, you'd potentially have had to go and hire a load of people just to look after that side of it.
Exactly. So we're on AWS and leverage them quite extensively, and we have an ambition to be a global, consistent core platform. And if everything is going to work out the way we want it to work out, that needs to be the same code base running in 28 regions around the world. Now, if you're going to build data centers yourself with triple redundancy in any given location in 28 different locations, it's just not feasible.
Yeah.
So we don't have, I would say, realistically, unless we were ginormous, we don't have a choice.
Yeah.
And it's clearly the most secure and most efficient way to do it.
So we were touching on this before we started chatting when I figured public cloud would be one of the things we talk about. And actually the context was something completely different to public cloud. We were talking about different national cultures, and we're comparing Norway's national culture to American. And for both reasons, our friend and former guest on the podcast, Danielle Royston, came up. And she is obviously completely unapologetically a cheerleader, literally, with the pom-poms she brought on the pod, for the public cloud. And she's also got a and I don't mean it's a bad way, a sort of American way of delivering it.
Yeah.
In other words, it's quite sort of in your face. It's quite unapologetic. It's quite strident. It's quite sort of marketing driven. Whereas, you know, I don't know enough about Norway to make comparisons between the UK and Norway, but I always feel an affinity with people from Scandinavia, Nordics, that I've met in that sort of slightly more understated, slightly more straight up, what you see is what you get approach. Anyway, but, you know, we have this thing with the public cloud, and when we had our podcast with Danielle, you know, Ian and I had been not hostile to it, but had expressed lots of reservations about it, because these companies are so big, and there was one particular thing that really rankled me, which is this social networking platform called Parler, that they sort of unilaterally kicked off.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter what you think about the merits of Parler or not.
Oh, no, that's your point.
To be able to just unilaterally kick someone off is dodgy. But, you know, one point Danielle made, we tried to sort of, well, at least I did, I tried to corner her and go, well, this is all a bit dodgy, isn't it? And she kind of conceded the point. But then she also said, well, what fucking choice have you got?
Yeah.
And that's what, a roundabout way to lead back to what you just said. It sounds like for you, and I'm sure AWS, I don't want to demonise AWS, I'm sure they add a hell of a lot of value, I'm sure they're there on merit, and they do have competition from Google, Microsoft and others. But sometimes you just think, God, is there this gravitational pull, like a black hole, that means that no one's going to be able to escape one of these three public cloud giants?
Partly, yeah. It's just, you know, go to reInvent and look at the product release list, and then compare that to any private cloud, and I think you have your answer.
Yeah.
I mean, it's that brutal.
And this is the problem for OpenStack, wasn't it? I guess partly that there just wasn't the resources to establish that as a viable alternative to one of those companies that Scott just mentioned.
Yeah, I think the how do I say this? I think the gravitational pull, as you articulated, the investment that was made in the products and services from these companies, even maybe 10 years ago, and certainly 5 years ago and 4 years, that's what you're seeing now.
I know, and you've got to hand it to them. I mean, they're there on merit. You look at Jeff Bezos, you know, he came up with Amazon in the 90s.
Yes.
And it's only probably in the last decade that it's became the totally sort of dominant giant that it is. And
there's this interview with him that's quite funny where he says, you know, the quarterly result, and he says, I don't care. I made that decision 4 years ago. Yeah. I'm just seeing there, you know. And they famously didn't give a toss about shareholders for years. They just went, look, this is a long-term investment. If you don't want to do it, piss off. And you know, yeah. But I think our point is it's very, very hard. I mean, for very specific workloads, you can have a discussion. But for general, mass-purpose, complex, global-scale products, replicating what you get from there, that takes a lot of manpower.
Is it an issue at all if you're, you know, trying to do business with an operator that's sort of gone all in with Azure, for instance?
Good question. Yeah.
Is that a challenge for you to then come in and say, well, we're all in with AWS, but we can work with you?
It's a complex question, but
he keeps asking the shitty ones. I bet you wish it was just me.
There's a you know, a silly answer and a real answer. The silly answer is, hey, it's as a service. Why do you care? Which is, there is merit in that answer, which is, hey, you're getting
because you could use the two. There's no reason you can't use it.
Well, that's a separate. But let's just assume. My first point is, if you're an operator and I comply to your security, your regulatory requirements, your performance requirements, and you get all the functionality that you need, why do you care where I do it from?
Yeah.
Right. But then you're an operator, and you're not going to think exactly like that. You're going to say, hell, well, because I have a discount agreement here, yeah, but I'm absorbing the hosting costs, so why does it matter? Yeah. That'll be my first question. And then say, yeah, but regulatory requirements, yeah, but then I'll comply to those in my own way. So that's how we have that discussion. And then, you know, is there a future where multi-cloud is a thing? Perhaps. But to be honest, right now, I think, you know, people talk about multi-cloud as resilience. I think a lot of technology people would say it's the opposite. You build so much complexity that the advantage of sitting across clouds, it increases your risk actually of downtime because your complexity goes up by so much that the risk of downtime in the center is much smaller than the risk of the complexity downtime that you build by being multi-cloud.
Yeah, it sounds like a similar thing to what Danielle Royston was saying when she was on here, and I've talked to her subsequently, that if you do go all in with you know, an AWS or an Azure, and you decide to take full advantage of those products, you sort of get more from it than if you're trying to build in these abstraction layers that allow you to move from one to the other. There's a trade-off involved.
There's
I guess.
Definite trade-off, and way smarter people than me, should we say, make that trade-off in our company.
Yeah.
But there's a real trade-off, and complexity is a real issue in delivering what we do.
Yeah.
And keeping it simple is a major thing.
Do they help you with the sort of go-to-market side of it at all? You know, in terms of reaching out to some of these big operators, and they can say, we've got this company called Working Group 2 that does core network products, and they, you know, we could advise that, you know, you should work with them potentially.
I actually give Amazon quite a lot of credit in that regard, because Mobile World Congress, you know, they host us and they introduce us to other operators. I mean, they do that for Ericsson and Nokia as well, to be clear, but I think they see us as one of the players that is trying to do something with the cloud more than just storage and compute. You know, there's a lot of lift and shift mentality from incumbents that they're just shifting, you know, their own hardware for Amazon's hardware. Yeah. We're changing the business model in the process, going from, you know, licenses to as a service, going to platforms instead of individual, you know, networks.
That's one of the biggest areas where we have tended to, I'll say we, every time I say we, I feel bad speaking on behalf of Ian, but you can always tell me if I'm talking shit and speaking on your behalf. But where we criticise operators is that more lift and shift, where all it seems to be is almost equivalent to the sort of sell and lease back type of thing, where you're saying you're not necessarily adding anything, you're just creating a bit of short-term liquidity by getting rid of on-premise stuff and moving it to the public cloud, which is fine. I can see how, to the CFO, that has some benefit, but in the long term, again, you know, back to the big thing that I get twitchy about, you're sort of you're selling your mortgage to AWS.
And not only that, but I think there's a couple of insights here. So one is, we believe the next generations of savings is much more an operating model, and we can come back to why that matters more than public versus private cloud. Because to be honest, if you're optimizing for performance, private cloud might actually be cheaper. Right. But the operating model that public cloud allows you to do is super powerful, and we can come back to that, because I think there are like tens of percentage points in savings. Shifting just workloads between is actually not very savings. So I think the industry, you know, they went from dedicated hardware to virtual machines, and virtual machines now to containers. Yeah. And under the hood, we're talking to operators who's like, containers, that's just even more complexity. I'm not done with my virtual machines yet. You know, they haven't done that shift yet. And then they have containers. For them, it's just additional complexity, and they don't know what to do with them. They're really frustrated. Yeah. Because complexity for them doesn't make it easier. Sorry, containers for them doesn't make it easier. It makes it more complex because they don't have everything else on containers. Yeah, yeah. You need some holistic.
Which is funny because containers are always, for what little I understand about them, are always positioned as these simplifying things, like everything.
And they can be, but then you need to put everything. You need to do things in one way,
strategy.
Right? Yeah.
Okay.
So
you don't want to mix, do you? Going on at the same time.
You kind of get the worst of. It's like multi-cloud in a way, right? Okay, there's pros and cons, but you very quickly just add on complexity on top of complexity, which is quite dangerous. So
I mean, talking about the cultural side of things, you know, you do hear some operators saying. There's obviously the extreme examples of Dish, I think, which is a greenfield anyway, saying everything's going to go into AWS that we can possibly put there.
And I make all sorts of Faustian
and then even AT&T, I think, has talked about moving its 5G core into the public cloud. Yeah. But then you hear other operators, it tends to be most of the European ones, I think, that I've talked to, saying, well, we wouldn't really want to do that. And some people are quite sort of outspoken about it and almost think they're putting a core competency somewhere that they can't sort of keep an eye on it anymore. I mean, is that like something you hear and a potential issue for you with the sort of AWS relationship and trying to support kind of operators? Or
Sure.
Yeah.
It will be. And it will be for a long time.
But that ties in with the whole cultural thing of doing things this way, I suppose.
So I think part of
our solution is to talk to the people that are genuinely interested, which is one of the reasons why having AWS introduce us to customers is very helpful, because they talk to people who are already there mentally, right?
Yeah.
But let's be clear, most network people, especially core network people, do not want to move to public cloud yet. For, I would say, good reasons and bad reasons.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of respect for the good reasons. There is stuff around big tech that you can be concerned about. There is stuff about resilience, autonomy. Yeah. There is stuff, you can solve most of that stuff, but there are genuine concerns that I think are valid, that you need a nuanced, detailed discussion to go through. And then I think there is a lot of structural incentive systems that drive bad reasons for not going there as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are there? So I started going about this Parler thing from about 2 years ago. I wonder whether there's service level agreements that differ. Whether, I'm not asking you to speculate about Parler, none of us know what's going on there, but whether hypothetically Parler may have had like an entry level thing where it's implicit in their SLA that they can cut you off any time, whereas people who have a more entrenched, a sort of mutually embedded sort of relationship with someone like a public cloud provider, whoever that is, the SLA will mean that it's very difficult for the public cloud provider to just cut them off. Because that would strike me as a big way of overcoming that objection. The objection that I go on about, a big way of overcoming it is, let's say someone's got their core on AWS, and Amazon decides that operator's fucking social media account doesn't align with their corporate culture, or some stupid arbitrary thing that seems to go on in corporate culture these days, that they still can't cut them off for a year. They've got to give them a year's notice going, look, we're not happy about that bloke tweeting about some culture war thing in the States, but they can't just unilaterally cut them off. I mean, I'm sure that's just me. I'm sure that's not, from your point of view, a major consideration. I'm just picking a relatively trivial example.
Scott is a libertarian.
Thank you, Pierre. Save me the bother.
Bitcoin.
This is I don't know how many of our pods you've seen. This is an ongoing joke now, because I was sort of prefacing things a few times with that, and Pierre started taking the piss. So now I'm trying to claim back the piss take.
No, but it's so this is where Amazon does treat the one guy with a credit card we talked about, and the biggest enterprise in the world. They do have different agreements.
Yeah,
yes.
There we go.
Yeah.
As you'd expect.
So short answer.
I had an interesting personal experience with that with a digital financial service provider called Stripe.
Yeah.
And I set up. I published a novel a year ago, and I set up a little place on a new platform called Locals, which is supposed to be designed for content producers to have a sort of direct commercial relationship with fans. This was at a time when I anticipated I would have fans. It hasn't turned out that way. But and I thought I'd set it up. And anyway, I had one person set up a billing thing. So it's to be described as like $5 a month or something. I had one person set it up. And then she had some weird shit go on with her bank account where she had some fraud. And then she had to go through and purge all this stuff. And she didn't recognise the billing thing she'd set up for this Stripe thing. So she flagged that up as fraudulent. And obviously it was a mistake, or maybe it wasn't. Anyway, maybe she regretted even those $5. She resented even those fucking $5. No, I know she doesn't, because I've chatted to her about it afterwards. But anyway, cut a long story short, once I got on their list, I'm now like a persona non grata for Stripe. Yeah. And that's, again, that feeds into my sort of paranoia, because Stripe's quite powerful. It's quite big and prevalent right now. And what if Scott Baceno, not just through this little account I set up for my book, but what if Scott Baceno as a person is on a Stripe shit list now? I think that's what really worries me, and this is much broader than what we're just talking about. This is like sort of digital economy on the whole.
Concentration of power is never good.
And there's so much of it. And like, we have a thing, we've joked about it, like, Ian, we go to a pub and they're saying we're cashless. And so you can only pay digitally. Yeah. Now, I'm with Ian on finding that objectionable, because you're like, what? You're taking away this one strand of interacting with the economy from me. So I suppose that's the thing. I'm not sure what the point I'm trying to make is, but just to sort of...
we can all agree that you should support small companies, though.
Totally. Totally. And then I suppose that's the thing. And you know, so you make the point that Amazon's got different relationships with a one-man band and a big company, and that's always going to be the way. And you have to navigate it. And a company like yours, which is an SME, you have to be savvy, and you're probably one of the principal people that has to do that as the CEO and the business guy. You have to be savvy and learn what their MO is and how best to navigate it and how not to fall foul of whatever little minefields there are there. But it does feel, I don't know, it feels like there's it's difficult to do. You've got to be a bit of an expert in that by itself to do it properly.
And it takes time and effort. It's not. This is not trivial nor easy nor.
No.
It's important.
But then the rewards are there.
There are, and again, I think there's like, I think some things you can fight and some things you can't.
Yes, you got to pick your fights totally.
And
keep telling my kids that.
Yeah, and we have to pick our fights. And there is no way we can match the reach, the breadth, the depth of what Amazon can give us in any other way. It just isn't.
Yeah. So you might as well go with it.
If I'm going to compete with the incumbents, I need some advantages, and we have to go with that. Does it raise a bunch of issues? Yeah, sure, it does. We generally work through them in, I would say, a reasonable way. But big tech concentration is, I'm not necessarily a fan of that myself.
No. Well, you're in a startup.
And by the way, one of the reasons I like telco is that it's, it's by definition fairly local in nature. It's local and complex and different and has its
going back to your
nuances.
Bangladesh experience.
Yeah. And even though, Vodafone is big, it's not big in global tech context, right?
Yep.
Telenor is big, but not big in global. So I kind of like that about it, that it's more fragmented. But that said, Amazon has been an amazing partner for us, commercially, technically, in most ways, and I can only kind of compliment them on that, to be honest.
Yeah, no, fair enough. And I'm always careful to temper my anxiety about this concentrations of power, to acknowledge, as we just said earlier, they've been developing this stuff for a long time. They obviously add a lot of value, just as they add value to me when I want to go off and buy some obscure thing. Where the fuck else am I going to get it except Amazon? Yeah. So fair enough. They've earned that. They've earned that place in my life.
They do a good job on the tennis.
A good job on the tennis.
They basically own all the tennis now, except for Wimbledon. So.
Oh, you're talking about content. Yeah. I was just talking about like old school Amazon. Just buying.
If you want to watch ATP stuff, then you have to sort of have an Amazon Prime account.
They didn't have the French, did they?
They don't have the slams are a bit different, but they have all the
other
tour,
stuff.
all the tour stuff.
Yeah, that's what I do. I've got a cross trainer at home. And I was just saying before we started podding, such as my shitty attention span and my general...
You watch Murray while you're doing your...
My general resentment of doing any exercise. I need two forms of distraction while I'm doing exercise. I listen to a podcast and I watch the tennis on mute on Amazon. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, they earned it and they paid for it. and they would have outbid other people. And fair enough.
But we also talked about, just prior to the podcast, we talked about this kind of security aspect of it. And how regulation and security happens and the whole Ukraine situation. And I think this is the flip side of public cloud, right? Where Amazon went out with a press release and they said, recently, I think 1 or 2 weeks ago, they said just prior to the invasion, government was super concerned about government data.
Yeah.
And they had a dialogue with Amazon. And if I remember correctly, the press release says Amazon basically drove in trucks into Kyiv and they just kind of downloaded, petabytes of government data, took it out, and at least that was secure.
Right. Why do they need to drive in trucks?
Which is really counterintuitive.
So much data.
They just couldn't do it over the internet. They got to do it.
Could have been security. Could have been. I don't know why. Okay. But they have this as a product. Actually, they have trucks as a product for massive amounts of data.
Trucks as a service.
Yeah, literally trucks as a service. So it's literally a data transfer product that they have.
Trash.
But the point is, this triggered a discussion in our company, which is, a lot of countries in Europe, they're very focused on national autonomy and national security and data not across borders, etc., etc., etc. But given what you're seeing in the Ukraine, if you're an operator, I would have argued that your best solution would actually be to have lots of different backhaul alternatives to your base stations, and then your core infrastructure running out of country. Because let's take a normal operator. I would say, let's say that they have 2 to 3 data centers in a country. So if you want to take them out, you bomb 3 places. That's it. Yeah. That's not very much.
Yeah.
And then you don't have any hardware left, basically, for your networking and for your data centers. So what you want then is you want this running in 50 data centers abroad, to be honest. If you want resiliency, that's what you want.
Yep.
Which actually competes with the national autonomy needs that are very often in focus.
That's the tension.
Yeah, it's quite a big thing in Germany, isn't it? The Germans are sort of very insistent on having... I remember this thing going on with, I think this arrangement between Microsoft and Deutsche Telekom, where they had to put their software and their systems inside Deutsche Telekom-owned centres in Magdeburg or whatever it is. And,
super complex.
Yeah, but like you say, then if you're doing it in a country that comes under attack all of a sudden, or has an earthquake maybe, or I don't know, something else it could be.
So the thing is, until you're at war, your incentives are to run everything inside borders to protect the interest of your citizens. When you're at war, you want resilience, and you definitely want everything outside your borders.
Yeah.
Which are completely conflicting in many ways, which is quite interesting thing to look at.
That does, looking at the time, that provides sort of as good a segue as I'm going to find at this time to sort of move it on. Because we've got a couple of other things we're going to chat about. Much as when we have a guest, I could happily talk about their sort of core thing the whole time. Our format is to talk about other stuff, albeit fleetingly towards the end of the pod. And so we were just talking about sort of more geopolitical stuff and how that impacts the telecoms world. That's a smartwatch, isn't it? Do you find that really distracting? I've noticed a couple of times. It's not a criticism. I've just noticed a couple of times you've had alerts come up. One of the reasons I don't have a smartwatch is I worry I'd feel enslaved to these little fucking alerts.
I actually turn off almost all of them.
Right, so you only get the important shit.
Yeah.
Is there a bunch of important shit happening that you should be dealing with instead?
So sorry about that.
We'll be like 20 minutes max.
Normally I never. Normally
then
it's never an issue.
I promise it's not a criticism. It caught my eye because I noticed it was catching your eye.
Yeah.
And
it's vibrating a little bit there. I apologize for that.
Well, you're a CEO, man. I'm sure there is important shit going on. That's one of the handy things about being irrelevant like me. You never have to worry about that stuff. Anyway, we've got about 20 minutes and then you can go back to saving your company. So yes, there's all this geopolitical stuff going on. You just talking about Ukraine, and who can begin to imagine the unique challenges that go on when you've got your shit getting bombed and possibly invaded by people who are hostile to you, who might then get hold of data and use it for whatever purpose. And then there's other stuff. Like I went, like Pierre, we didn't finish this chat. I went and bought a new car the other day, and Pierre's sending me all these messages. Pierre wanted me to buy a Skoda. I ended up buying a Ford, and then he's sending me these messages this morning going, yeah, what year, and all that sort of thing. I know where he's going. He's basically trying to say, you made a shit choice. You should have got this.
No, but I just saw. I looked at the car and I was like, it's fine. It's just, in terms of the interior, you don't have Android CarPlay, which to me, it's called
Android Auto. Is CarPlay the iOS one?
Yeah, so
right. Yeah, I do. I'm just not that mad about it. 2017 is when they started.
Ah, so you just missed out on...
No, I've just got it.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
I had to buy a whole new USB-C lead just to make it work, though. But
so you got the car already? You received it?
Oh, yeah, I bought it.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So I had to, man. The other car was on its last legs. It was starting to become a source of domestic anxiety.
It's a Ford.
Yeah, Ford Focus. I've only ever had Ford Focuses.
Did you get?
So I can't be fucked to think about it.
Did you get anything for the old one?
600 quid.
Oh,
damn.
To be honest, mate, I was grateful for that.
That was
nice.
You know the percentage of new cars in Norway that are electric now?
What's that?
Half.
Half.
Damn.
Wow.
Yeah, they have the most Nissan Leafs, I think, ever.
I wouldn't be surprised. It's completely ridiculous.
They should call it a Nissan Pine Needle in Norway.
Oh.
Dad joke.
The weather is not great for
it works surprisingly well, though. Actually, it's
the batteries perform less well when it's cold.
When it's minus 30, yes.
It does.
Great.
But the worst thing is the Tesla Model 3, the handles, you have to push them in. I don't know if you've seen them, but they
freeze.
They freeze.
Oh, shit.
Yeah.
How did I make us go? With the little time we got left, I've pushed us onto this bullshit tangent. Sorry. What was I... why did I bring that up?
Wider concerns around telecom and geopolitics.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's right. Yeah, and I was chatting to the Ford guy, and he was going on about the electric car thing. No, I was asking about a new car, because I dropped 10 grand on a 5-year-old car. And I remember that the old car I got was about 6 years old, and it only cost me £5,000. This was about 10 years ago, and I only ever buy shitty used cars because I'm skint, because I'm a fucking journalist, innit? And anyway, and I was going, you know, what would a new one of this cost? I just wanted to get some sense of depreciation. It said new ones like about 23, 24 grand. And I was like, okay, so there's that sort of 13-14k depreciation over 5 years. And then from the car I've got now,
what is it, like 30,
once you
35,000 miles?
40 odd.
Yeah.
That's the one I bought.
I think
Now you
most
make
of
me
the
feel like I'm being ripped
depreciation's
off.
as soon as you've
No,
actually bought the car, isn't it?
Yeah, well, exactly. That's the point. As soon as you
That's a
get it
fair
off,
price.
a brand new car depreciates massively straight away. Whereas I've got a car that's 5 years old for 10 grand, and that'll depreciate by about £1,000 a year.
Yeah.
Anyway, and I asked him about a new car, and he went, "You couldn't fucking get one."
Yeah.
Because this is the reason for this tangent, is the component shortage is so massive that if you ask for a new Focus, if I went, I want a new Focus off you.
6
This
months.
is like a proper Ford place. I didn't go to just some random sort of backstreet garage.
It's 6 months. Yeah.
Oh no, this bloke was going, we might just say no.
Really?
Because the component
Yeah.
makers make more money out of selling their components to, or of doing components for smartphones and other things than they do for cars. So they prioritise. They
I
presumably
just didn't realise that. That was
prioritises-
just an anecdotal example of how fucked it is, the whole global supply chain thing. Anyway, yes, so there's all sorts of really fascinating interdependent stuff going on. That's a word to say after you've had a few beers, interdependent. And Ian,
I've got another one.
what's that?
Well, it's for the last section, so I'll mention
Okay,
it later.
well, let's
but
save that.
Remind me.
So let's move it on, Ian, because we've got like about a quarter of an hour left anyway. You wrote a little thing about the fibre
Yeah.
side of it.
Well, a company called STL got in touch actually, because lots of people are writing about the thing you just mentioned, you know, component shortages and supply chain issues, not just to do with telecom, but all sorts of industries at the moment, which I think a lot of it's come out of the pandemic. You know, you've had a rebound in demand, and then obviously factories got put on hold. They're still under lockdown, I think, in parts of China. So
Well, they freak out every time someone sneezes, don't they?
totally. So with that being such an important market for manufacturing and assembly and stuff, it's just caused
Oh, I've got another tangent.
some issue. But,
Sorry, Karen.
But then one I wasn't aware of, because it's not something I've ever really tracked before, was the actual fibre itself. So not the, I mean, when I write about it, it tends to be about things like OLTs and ONTs, which are the electronic bits at the end of each end of the kind of fibre line. But the actual
Right.
cable stuff, which gets made by people like Corning and Prysmians, and I think it's like 7 or 8 globally. But and one is STL, which used to be called Sterlite, now just wants to be referred to as STL. They're an Indian company, and they're a major supplier to the UK market. They have a contract with OpenReach. They Giganet, who we had on the podcast
Yep.
recently. A lot of this kind of
Last pod,
altnets.
I think. Yep.
The guy, I mean, you have to look this up, I suppose, but he said they're the main supplier of that into the UK at the moment.
Right.
They're the biggest company. And OpenReach, by the way, didn't, when I wrote the thing and got in touch with them, they didn't sort of dispute a lot of this stuff. So he was saying that one of the problems is getting access to things that you need for the manufacturing process. So one's this substance called polyethylene. It's basically a plastic, polyethylene, that it's because it's a plastic, it's kind of, the price is very dependent on what the price of crude oil is at any time.
Right, yeah, because they're all from fractional distillation.
Everybody who fills
Back to
their
my
car
GCSE
up
chemistry.
knows that's gone up a lot in
Well, tell
in
me
cost.
about it. The other day.
And then
Fucking
the
80 quid.
other one's helium, which is used in the manufacturing process, and apparently it's a byproduct of natural gas. So you get it from markets like Russia, a lot of it, and obviously with what's going on at the moment, it's been hard to get things. They're having to look for alternative sources. So he was saying basically lead times have gone up a lot for staff. They're having to sort of think about who you serve first. And which is interesting, because I
prioritising,
remember
like we said with the
Jarlath
chips.
from Giganet was saying what we're finding is the stuff that we've ordered. I remember I went and listened back to it after he'd said this, and he wasn't specifically talking about this. He was talking about components generally, but he said things we ordered that were expecting to come in August have now slipped to April 23. And then he
It's
says
amazing
when it
slippage.
does come in, you're getting told that you're not going to get as much of it because they're having to sort of make sure
And you
that
should be
everybody gets
grateful for
something.
whatever you get.
Yeah, and the prices are going up. So STL was saying the prices they're charging for their fibre products going into the UK, they reckon are going up by about a fifth to a quarter.
So I went and filled my not so new car up, but newer than the old shit one that I flogged for 600 quid. And that cost
quid.
nearly 80 quid.
Yeah. Oh, petrol?
Petrol. Yeah, that cost nearly 80 quid. And I went to Costco the other day Granted, I buy a few things. I buy a few things for my dad. I got some pricey ribeye steaks, but it's the first time I've ever topped 400 quid in Costco. 400 quid in one shop. They're not fucking chase.
That was a truckload.
That wasn't even that much. I mean, I'm trying to think of what other premium shit we bought. I didn't even buy any booze.
I filled the tank the other day, 86 pounds.
Damn.
And it's funny because it's like, I mean, I have a diesel, so it's like 199.9 now. I got it at 195, but now it's like, there's clearly like, they're resisting the 2.
Right.
Yeah.
They're like, we're going to hold on, because then once it gets to 2, people will riot. And
I tell you, doesn't it make you grateful that we don't have jobs that involve us commuting by car?
Yeah.
But
Norway's had the highest power prices for like in memory these days.
And Norway's to a degree self-sufficient because you've still got North Sea oil.
fully
and stuff.
But we're sending electricity to you guys.
Yeah.
Right.
That's not entirely true.
No,
but we do actually have cables to you guys into Germany, which means the kind of peak pricing actually is affected by wind in Germany and wind in the UK.
Yeah.
So when you guys don't have wind, we send you power, and that takes peak prices in Norway up quite a lot, which is good in the big picture of things, but really bad in the small
But
picture
it's the
of things.
interdependence, isn't it?
Exactly. But it's
fascinating.
good, you know, in over time and at scale it's good, but at small it's really bad. And there's like this in the Norwegian newspaper, it's like, this is how much your shower costs today.
Right.
It's like, I think it was like 5
Thanks to
quid or
sweaty
something.
Brits. Yeah.
I have a smart meter at home now, so I see exactly how much I use. And you get obsessed with it. Like every day it's about
No,
2
not everyone
pounds.
does. I've got smart meter. You made that choice to get obsessed with it.
No, but every day, because I have it right there, and every day is pretty much 2 pounds of electricity per day.
Is it?
Yeah, more or less.
I tell you, I've just taken the piss out of you, Pierre, but I'm increasingly starting to think I'm going to have to get obsessed. I hate thinking about just like daily or monthly household finance. How much do we spend at Sainsbury's? How much do we spend here, there, or the other? But shit, it's getting to the point where I might have to start obsessing. I might have to start going to Aldi and shit.
well, we've started doing
Little.
that. They're good.
I know, but I hate them. It's just that I go in there and I'm just like, you haven't got the shit I want.
That's
Yeah.
the problem. You don't get all the stuff you need. But so going back to telecoms anyway,
Yeah, yes.
which is what the podcast is about.
Oh, yeah, so it is.
The other thing that's happening is sort of worker shortages, which anybody who's trying to book a summer holiday will know
British
about.
Airways. Yeah.
But in telecom as well. I mean, Openreach has been complaining about getting staff they need for sort of fibre build out. And obviously, it's a bit of an issue with Brexit. People will mope. Remainers are saying that because it's obviously made.
I remember reading about that.
Something that'll wind you up, I know. But
No, not at all. I mean, it's valid. I think it came up when Jarlath was on. We were talking about Spain and Portugal, and how they've got all these people with this expertise and they can't bring them in.
Totally, but it's not just. I mean, it's not just that. I don't think it's. There's issues in other markets as well as I understand it.
I maintain it's not Brexit. Maybe I'm biased because I'm a sort of pro-Brexit person. I maintain that it's a failing of the British bureaucracy. We could make it easier for example, Spanish and Portuguese engineers to come in.
Yeah.
And we're being dicks about it. Maybe Europe's being a dick as well. But it's not an inevitable consequence of Brexit. It's just a consequence of the bureaucratic sort of outcome of Brexit. Anyway, sorry. That's pedantic.
And then the related to all this disruption, I suppose, is the possibility of kind of strike action now with, I think, BT in the last few days.
Yeah.
They've been, the Communications Workers Union, it is in the UK, that's been in talks with staff about, it would be the first telecom strike, according to the CWU, for 35 years. But you potentially have a situation where you've got a postal strike, an airline strike, and a kind of
former public monopolies.
Yeah, and a
They're
telecom
all
strike
called
at the
British
same time.
something.
And the telecom strikes, you sort of think, well, my broadband's there, it's just going to keep working, isn't it? But, if you've got an outage or something, and there's, or service problems, basically there's no one there to fix it. If you're working at home all of a sudden and that happens...
Do you think we should go on strike? If informative
But I think
pay us more?
the macro implication of this is quite interesting, right? Because what you're paying for your mobile subscription, I don't know how it is in the UK. Is it changing?
Not right. Not
it's supposed
not
to be
immediately.
going up. It's supposed to be going up, though, isn't it?
No, both my broadband and my mobile. I think it goes up with inflation, but there's nothing beyond that, and that's once a year.
It goes up with inflation?
But with inflation's a lot. That's a 10.
Yeah, well, so the last inflation tweet will have been a sort of low single figures percent. The next one will probably be a lot
Next one will
higher.
be up a tenth.
Yeah.
But I think in many countries they're not able to even capture inflation.
Oh, okay.
And then you see, you're talking about your fiber, right? And
Yeah.
you're talking about your labor shortages,
Yeah.
which are your inputs.
Yeah.
And they're doing, 5, 10, 15, 20%.
Yeah.
The components probably, double digits and labor high single digits. And then your top line
Your top, yeah. So BT's
Is
top line
not the
last year is
same.
down
Well, that's where you
2%.
that's where you really understand the sort of inflationary spiral. Because this
I
thing
think it's
goes up, so then people want more wages, so then you give them more wages, then that feeds into the economy, and then things go up. It's macroeconomics is fucked
I'm just
up.
going to start buying components and stock them in my
just
garden
start building your own
and
shit.
selling on eBay years later.
I think grow vegetables. I think is a safer option, to be honest.
Well, I'll need fertilizer, which I won't be able to get.
You were saying earlier before we sort of came on, there's this constant pursuit of kind of cost savings within every year. They're trying to knock off an extra percentage or an extra 2%, and it's been a particularly big thing at Telenor, actually, hasn't it? They've made a big deal about a bit sort of margin improvements, which they've been able to kind of deliver over the last 10 years, I think. But
I think for the whole industry, that model is coming to a breaking point. So I think that's my bigger point here.
The shaving off of costs.
It's creaking in the, I don't know what the English word is, but your walls are starting to kind of creak. You put so much pressure on them now that it's
The walls are closing in.
or it's kind of there's you can't cut 3% forever. 3% of very little is nothing.
But isn't there a lot further they could go with things like, I mean, I'm not saying I want it to happen, but with your company's almost an example of it. If you can run a core network very, very efficiently with a relatively small number of people compared with the teams that you might have at Ericsson or Nokia, then that implies you can just make do with fewer staff and
so
not
of
have
course,
to use
we
them.
see that as an opportunity, of course.
Yeah.
So yes, is part of the answer, and I think this is what I'm trying to say is that there's going to be an operating model change at some point, because your 3% takes you, to here. Thereafter, you actually need to change how you do business.
Yeah.
Because then your 3% doesn't work anymore.
Yeah.
You
can't
your
keep
vendor
salami
just says,
slicing.
no, sorry, I'm not going to do this.
Keep trimming the fat. There's no fat left.
There's no fat left.
It's like
right?
me, I've got no fat left.
Yeah, exactly. Let's see.
5%.
It's a cross trainer.
There is body fat 0.
Exactly.
And
No, it's
3% of 0 is 0.
Where do I go from here?
But there's an interesting, what I'm trying to say, there's a bit of a pressure cooker, I think.
Yeah.
So I think in this podcast, a year from now, you're going to have some interesting discussions about what the hell is happening there, because the pressure is becoming quite high.
Yeah.
And do come back in a year from now or within then, because one thing, because I'm going to start.
Flights will be too expensive.
Yeah, it's true. I'm going to start wrapping up in a minute. We're not going to have time, by the way, audience, to talk about the metaverse thing that I spoke about at the
I
start.
didn't get to say my thing that I thought was a good tongue twister.
What was that? Go on then.
Well, because the whole thing, the standards thing you were talking about, seemed to be whether you have one metaverse
Right.
or multiple interoperable metaverses.
Oh my God.
Which even I'm struggling to say now with
Yeah.
two or three.
No,
people.
well, and that's one of the reasons I don't want to get into it. Other than the fact we've run out of time, to do something like what you've just said justice requires at least half an hour of talking shit. So we're not going to do it. But yeah, it's really, I really value, obviously for us, if we get someone from a really big notable brand like, I don't know, Neil McGrath from BT, that's really great. But I really value bringing people on who are in the nicest possible way on the periphery, because you're viewing it as challengers, you're viewing it as you're critiquing the business models of the core people and offering solutions.
Disrupt.
Yeah, disrupting, but also disrupting sometimes sounds a little bit sort of belligerent.
We love the industry, so we're not trying to screw the industry. We want to help it.
But what you are is you're asking questions, and in that way you've got that in common with us journalists, because that's what we're supposed to do. Not all journalists do that these days. So yeah, do anytime you're over here, let us know, and it'd be great to chat again. I had one little tangent before we wrap up. Utterly nothing to do with telecoms. I was just thinking about it with your Wimbledon thing yesterday.
Oh yeah.
I was reading in the news when I came over that two of the people who were the biggest challengers in the men's singles this year have had to drop out today because they tested positive for COVID.
Berrettini. Berrettini dropped out.
And Cilic.
Oh, I didn't know Cilic had dropped out. Oh, that all of a sudden makes Nadal's half a lot easier, because those were the.
Look at you knowing the whole draw.
I didn't know the whole draw pretty much.
Yeah.
He's been lucky.
Who?
Nadal.
You're
Well,
paying
he's won
attention
the
to
first team
No,
majors.
yeah, but in French,
He's
in
fucking
the
well
semi-finals, he had the guy drop out, right? Yeah.
Yeah, but he was a set up anyway.
Yeah, but still, it's less tennis to be played.
Anyway, the point I want to make, the point I want to make
when
about
you've won it
this,
14 times, then there's probably more than luck involved. But
yeah, actually,
come on, Pierre.
But he's old, so if you could save like an hour of tennis here and there.
well, he fucking dealt with that Norwegian bloke in the French Open, didn't he? He was
style.
Norwegian, wasn't he? Rude.
Yeah.
He's
Still
one of his students.
Yeah, no,
It's like
I know.
playing
He
his
loves
student,
him.
basically.
I think it was, yeah.
I thought it'd be close because I thought
I thought it'd be closer.
Rude looked
Rude's
really
good.
impressive
Yeah, he
in the
is
build-up,
good.
but that just shows how awesome Nadal
I think he
was.
was a bit overawed by his
Could be.
sort of mentor, basically.
But anyway, the point I wanted to make is, so the thing interests me. So you were there on the day.
Yeah.
You're milling about. Presumably you weren't tested for COVID going in.
No, well, we don't do that anymore, do we? Here,
What? And yet Berrettini and Cilic can't play in Wimbledon.
but they could. I suspect they've done it of their own volition.
see.
I don't think anybody's preventing
Maybe
them.
it just felt like shit.
They just probably. I think Berrettini was saying he didn't feel particularly good, which is you're not going to play
Well,
tennis,
at
are you?
this level, if you even feel the slightest under the weather,
Yeah.
yeah, but would they have taken a sickie if they had a cold?
Well, I don't know.
See, that's what I'm
And
thinking.
maybe it's worse.
That's
than
what
that for them.
I'm just speculating about. I don't know one way or the other.
Didn't feel like a cold though.
Maybe it felt worse than a cold.
But if you had like the latest flavour of COVID,
Yeah, I was knocked out.
Oh, were you? I had it, and it wasn't all that. I couldn't taste my cheese and wine
2
at
days
Christmas.
was horrible.
You
then
were
it
fucked
was
up. How
2
long ago
weeks
was that?
of crap. But
How long ago was that?
6 months, I don't know.
If,
Something.
if someone had said to you, Scott,
Well, maybe
you've
you
got to go
still
out-
had not. What
When
the
you had it
latest
at
one?
Christmas, if someone had said to you, you've got to go out and play a 5-set tennis match against Nadal, you'd have gone no, wouldn't you? Whereas otherwise you'd have been well up for it.
Although normally I would have been.
I had trouble
plummeted.
watching a game of tennis at that point.
Yeah. Well, and that's fair enough. Obviously, I'm not going to belittle it. Some people are still having shitty experiences. with COVID. I just think it's weird that there's no other time where someone said, you know, the returning finalist can't play because he's got a cold or because he's got flu or because he's got an STD, whatever.
Do you know what's going to happen now, though? Cilic and Berrettini were both at the same event. They were at Queen's. Anybody who played at
gonna
Queen's,
be a Queen's thing.
and then it's going to spread to the Wimbledon. It's going to completely disrupt Wimbledon. And
That's a good
basically
point.
Djokovic
There's
is
two
gonna
of them.
win
This
'cause
is
he's
just we're
he's
just
already
at day
had it.
2. That's a really good point. We're just at day 2. The whole tournament could get fucked up.
Well, let's hope that doesn't happen. Yeah.
Let's hope just the English people don't get it, and then we just win tons
Win
by
by
default.
default.
the best thing was at the Euro, the football, where it was like, oh, one player has whatever COVID, so he cannot play. He's not in the team. And then that player would fly back to a different country on the same plane as all the other.
Yeah.
Is he at the back of the
So-
plane? Is he?
So that was my point. If this is an epidemiological thing, then there's no testing. So Ian could be sat around, you know, Paolo, for all we know, could have had COVID and giving it to Ian, giving it to everyone in the fucking stadium. But that's not a matter of epidemiological concern. And yet a player having it when he's by himself, slapping the ball
he's
around.
touching.
think-
He's touching the ball, and then the ball boy's
From what I
touching it.
read in the BBC this morning,
It was their own choice.
it was his. It wasn't
fair
like
enough.
he went into a testing thing and was like, "I need to isolate." He just went, "I've got COVID and I don't feel good," and probably
Right.
doesn't want to spread it around because there's still that stigma about going out and playing when you know you've got it.
He doesn't
isn't
want to
there?
get that. Doesn't
So-
want to get that bad press of being a super spreader.
Well, exactly. Yeah,
All right.
there's that as well.
So that a complete non-telecoms tangent. Erland, thank you very much. It was a pleasure having you here, and you're
Thanks for
welcome
having
back anytime. Let's compare notes about the state of the world in a year's time.
Let's do that.
Yeah.
Good occasion.
And other than that, thank you for listening, and make sure you join us for the next one.